Okay, this is the second set of graphs that we have. The first we're going to talk about is, let's say we've got, getting another marker, I apologize. The demand curve for labor is the marginal productivity of the worker, marginal number of wins they're adding, times the marginal revenue per win. Okay. So, let's say we've got consumer discrimination. So, start out, everything is great. In our labor market, we've got equilibrium quantity, equilibrium wage. If there is, for some reason, right, consumer discrimination in watching either on TV or a game a certain group of players play, then what's going to happen is that player actually brings in a lower number of additional revenue per win. Let's say for some reason people don't like people with blonde hair. Then the wage for the people with blonde hair that were playing the game would bring in less money from ticket sales, jersey sales, apparel sales than an otherwise equally talented non-blonde haired player would. Right? And so if the marginal revenue per win decreases, what's the demand for the labor of that group? And that was coming from consumers that this decreased. Basically, it works just like employer discrimination in that, we'll call this W2. It would result in a lower wage for whatever group was being discriminated against by consumers. Right? Whatever group was being discriminated against by consumers, that would decrease the marginal revenue per win that that group who was being discriminated against brought in, decreasing the demand curve for labor for that type of group of player, decreasing their equilibrium wages. Right? And the problem with this is, unlike employer discrimination, right, as long as we had one employer, right, it made sense that that player could pay a higher wage. And as long as we had two or three non-discriminatory employers that were competing against each other, they could drive wages back to whatever the equilibrium was. Right? And so the problem is here, if we've got consumers who are discriminatory, well, I'm just experiencing less additional revenue from my wins now from having that type of player. And so I don't need, like, let's say all but 10 people are discriminatory. Well, yeah, they're going to, everyone else's additional revenue per win is going to be maybe significantly higher, right? If I get an additional $3 because if I don't hire this group that's being discriminated against, the quality's low. So once I start hiring them, the quality of my league's back up high and demand is high, and the masses just want to see high quality. They're not discriminatory. Then it makes sense that we would need a pretty big block of my consumers to be non-discriminatory in order to drive that. If I get a pretty big block of discriminatory consumers, well, even the additional money I could bring in from non-discriminatory consumers by offering a higher quality play wouldn't compensate me for the amount of money I lost in demand from these consumers who had a huge taste for discrimination. So if we had a big block of non-discriminatory consumers, they would kind of drive our hiring decisions. But if they were in the minority, if they, in terms of the non-discriminatory consumers were a smaller group, then they might drive the league to also be discriminatory. And this is kind of like what we saw, prior to kind of Jackie Robinson breaking the barrier into Major League Baseball. So that's that. The next, and that was slide 22. If we continue to go down here, the next one I want to talk about is slide 26. So, talking about men and women, why might we have gender discrimination going on? or is there gender discrimination going on? Well, it's the same exact idea. So let's think about this demand curve for labor, and we'll do NBA, and we'll do the demand for WNBA. Okay. Marginal number of additional wins. We could probably argue that if we're looking at like the top players and then the second best player, maybe that marginal productivity of our players, or the number of additional wins they add, isn't really a whole lot different. Right? They play the same number of games and all, maybe it's not that much different. But if we think about the marginal revenue per win in the NBA and the marginal revenue per win in the WNBA, right? I don't think it's that hard to argue that this is much, much higher, right? And so you know that if this is higher, the demand curve for labor, regardless of the talent level, is going to be higher in the NBA. And so you would expect that every single equality position to have that player in the NBA be paid higher than an equally similar quality position in the WNBA. Okay? Now, we can get an idea about this by just looking at the raw numbers of revenue generated from broadcast deals, things like that. And that's why seeing lower wages in the WNBA isn't necessarily an example of discrimination, right? It's driven by consumers. I guess you could argue consumers are discriminatory, but some would say it's just a preference. Okay. And we could compare any league's wages to see and think about it through that way as well. If the demand for the league is higher and they can generate more additional revenue per win, it's likely we're going to see higher wages because of the higher demand curve in that sport. So if we go down let me make sure I get the slide number correct. Slide 28. Right? So one thing I wanted to kind of bring up, and I'm not sure if this is somewhat related to slide 28 and a little bit on 29. It's this same idea. But instead of looking at wages, if you just say, well, I saw very similar TV views or very similar ticket sales across two different leagues, right? Maybe the NBA, WNBA, and so therefore lower wages in the WNBA are discriminatory because they sell just as many tickets, right? So let's think about, we had two teams playing in the same size stadium, right? NBA, WNBA, a lot of them use the same arenas. We know, well, I guess I shouldn't say we know, but if I'm thinking about, I look at the revenue generated from the NBA and I see from all the other, all data I can see in terms of generated revenue, that it's always higher in the NBA than it is in the WNBA. And even if they have monopoly power, the way I'm drawing it here, so WNBA, where are my equilibrium ticket prices going to be? Well, and actually, I could have drawn this. You know what? I might edit this out, or you'll just bear with me because I want to prove this point even more. So we have that same model. Got the stadium capacity. I need to leave myself a little more room. That's why I had to. Let's say I've got the NBA up here, and I've got the WNBA right here. So now we're at the equilibrium points. I could have shown you before that demand is lower, quantity of tickets would have been lower, and prices would have been lower, but I can even go as far as to say sometimes we'll see things be the same, like the quantity of tickets, especially when we're looking at ticket data. And yeah, the quantity of tickets will be the same here, but the price of tickets in the NBA much higher than the price of tickets in the WNBA. So quantity matters, but so do prices, right? And we're talking about things like total revenue. And so this is a kind of a good example of that. Let me double check. And that should be